before very much. I appreciate that. For the next section of our debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to the question, and if it's necessary, we'll ask a follow-up. At this time, we'll start with candidate Dean and go back the other direction. The first question for you candidates. Hennepin County reports that 80% of the households in Senate District 58 receive some type of economic support from the county. This includes things like child care support, MFIP, and food stamps. Dr. Algernon Austin of the Economic Policy Institute in Washington, D.C. cited Minneapolis as having the grossest disparity in unemployment between whites and blacks in the 50 United States. Given the longevity of economic starvation and the lack of business investment in this district presently, what is your 3-point strategy to stimulate economic growth in SD 58 and to better the economic condition for that 80%?
If there were 3 points that I would have to address the disparity issues on the north side relative to economic development and individuals of need, would be first to address the issue of jobs. And that's an easy thing to say. It's a harder thing to do. Currently, we have several different agencies, governmental agencies, that are not actually working in harmony. In some ways, they're working apart from each other. And we need to make sure that our federal dollars for jobs programs and that our state dollars, as well as our local dollars, are aligned so it can truly be effective. But it doesn't just take money. It also takes a vision to really say, how do we get people back to work, and how do we get them employable with living wages? Part of the disparities that exist on the north side have a lot to do with the issue of, in many ways, over-policing. The war on drugs has targeted low-income and minority communities in what I would say is a very unfair system that targets mainly African-American males to bring them into the prison system. And we need to change that. We need to adjust that. And so creating opportunities that get people back to work and have them the ability to work is going to be critical. I also think that we need to begin to spend our money in the community. Right now, we don't have a lot of opportunities for spending the money in the community, and we need to create those businesses so we can stay in the community and spend our money in the community, which ultimately is going to get us back economically viable. Because if people in our community can earn money in our community, it's going to create a much, much more thriving system. And lastly, what I think we need to do is we need to be honest. We need to be honest that we do have great disparities, and we need to be talking to people at the Capitol and the people that are in control, that it doesn't just take a little bit of money at a time. It really takes a significant amount of money to push us over the tipping point. If we continue where we're at today with the same type of programs, we'll never be able to shift. So there needs to be a concentration and an influx of funds into our community to push us forward.
Thank you, Candidate Dean. Candidate Alexander.
Well, first of all, I never did thank you for agreeing to moderate this, and thank you for the Senate District 58 for doing this. You know, I actually wrote my grad paper at the Humphrey Institute. Tara and I went to grad school together, so it's nice to see you again. And you know, what's fascinating is that North Minneapolis has a long history of economic turmoil, but it didn't always have that history. I mean, when you go back, the house I actually bought after the tornado was owned by an individual, a biracial couple. She was Jewish and he was African American back in the 1960s. And the area had a very vibrant culture that after riots and other things, it just dissipated. But the reason why people don't invest in North Minneapolis is confidence. I mean, people are not confident that this area is going to turn around. There's lots of visions, and quite honestly, there's been lots of money put into North Minneapolis. But that money hasn't been used in a way that would bring about actual change. So when you look at the bigger picture, I think you first have to start with the youth and people that are actually coming into the system. The disparities among African Americans and Caucasian children in North Minneapolis, is just astounding. So you have to start with the education system. The second thing is you have to start with dealing with the crime issue. And there's some proposals I definitely would like to talk about that deal with crime. And then I think the third is you need to actually, excuse me, you need to actually talk to people that are in the business community that know how to bring jobs to an area and work with them. I'm always amazed that when you look at North, we all have lots of ideas and we all have lots of vision. Sometimes we butt heads because because we're so interested in promoting our idea of vision, that we don't look at the bigger picture. And as a candidate, one thing I would love to do is to bring people together to move forward and build off our strengths in the community.
Fantastic. Candidate Cole?
Kind of bring us back to the question to talk about the number of people in North Minneapolis that receive support. For those of you who don't know, I do work for the county, but I don't work in human services. I work in research, planning, and development. And one issue and concern that people have always talked about, which includes workers, is that we have people receiving services with services being in a completely different part of the city. So how do we expect for community to be successful? We talk about these rates and we throw around numbers and statistics, but how do we expect for community to be successful when we are sending them across town with not adequate transportation or without adequate access to real stabilizing programs that are going to help them get from whatever the situation that they're into right now to work? What I see as important for us is that we need to get people to jobs, whether those are jobs in the urban core. We have a bevy of jobs on North 2nd Street. But it's been an issue even that the entire, that the Hawthorne community has even fought, which is how do we get the residents who live on the other side of 94 to work at the jobs that are there? We have solutions in our community. What we need to do, and what I would expect us to do as a group and as a community together, is to hold our leaders responsible for making sure that the services and the assets that we have in this community stay in this community, and we are connecting each other.
Thank you. Candidate Conklin?
Thank you. So I have a three-point plan. When I was in school, I had the opportunity to do a research project with Hawthorne Area Community Council, actually. And I looked at the employers along the river in 2004, so a little dated. And we found that there were excellent jobs along the river at that time. There were a lot of industrial jobs that were paying living wages and that were union, so many had benefits. And what we found were that employers were not very eager to be hiring people from our communities, nor were they very eager to even cross the highway to come to our businesses. And so so the next step to that project was to take a look at the economic assets and capacities of the residents of North Minneapolis, more specifically in Hawthorne. And we saw that there was a lot of people eager to work with a lot of work experience, wanting to start small businesses, but the opportunities were just not necessarily there. And another trend that I found in that project was that what was really essential for a person to be successful in this project was defined by being employed at the time of the survey, and this is at 2006 at this point, being employed at the time of the survey and being a homeowner. There's a very strong relationship to having a high school diploma or a GED and having a driver's license or being mobile. And so I think those are two things that we really need to focus on, is the mobility of people to get to and from work and their ability to graduate high school. I have 30 seconds, so I'll say, additionally, I think that we need to have socially responsible employers. We need to attract socially responsible employers that will pay living wage jobs, that will provide job training, on-the-job training for people, that will provide second chances to people, and support our local communities. And so they invest in the communities in which they have their business. And finally, I think it's also about building community. I think that our communities need to talk to each other. I think that we need to get to know each other, and through that we'll support each other. And we'll have a more economically viable community that supports itself.
You all did very nicely. Excuse me, and you did a great job on time. So we'll go right into the second question to maximize the opportunity to hear from you, if that's all right. We'll start with you this time, Candidate Cole. That's all right. 2 deep breaths, you've got time. All right, we'll start with you, Candidate Cole. Even though violent crime in Minneapolis is down by 42% since 2005, during the 2011 legislative session, the GOP passed a public safety omnibus funding bill, which drastically made cuts to public safety that impact vulnerable populations. For example, these cuts reduce funding services for battered women and advocacy services for abused and neglected children. If elected, what would you do specifically to restore some of this funding?
I think what's important for our legislators to understand, and our other elected officials as well, is the understanding, and in particular when we start talking about domestic abuse and violence, that it's not just an urban issue, it's not just a woman's issue, it is a family issue. And that when we do not combat crime within the home, it spills out into the community. What we need to do is to invest in youth development programs that teach kids how to have healthy relationships. We don't teach that in school anymore. So if you're not going to get it at home, we need to have an opportunity and a space and place for people to learn that. And youth tend to learn that through a structured activity with a trusted adult. To be able to report issues of abuse, but in a way that is constructive, that teaches the family how to be productive and how to not be dysfunctional with violence. When you start to talk about violence, in particular with youth, bullying is a huge issue. Bullying starts with aggressive kids in kindergarten, it starts in preschool. It is a learned behavior. And the more we start to discuss how abuse starts and how it happens, particularly around violence, and making sure that we make that part of our curriculum. So we don't necessarily need to spend more dollars, but how do we integrate that into the work that we currently do to ensure that we have a solid platform that combats violence at all levels?
Thank you very much. Why don't we go with candidate Alexander next, please?
Okay, the question was on, I'm sorry, I should have brought a piece of paper, but it's on crime, ways to combat crime?
Yes, that even though the crime has gone down in Minnesota 42 by 42%,
Okay, I remember
ways
that.
to combat
Yeah.
it.
Well, you know, the cuts, I just had this conversation ironically on cuts the GOP put forward just the other day. And I have to admit, I didn't actually realize quite to the extent that it has been harmful, or quite to the extent that it has occurred. I'm on the board of the Sexual Violence Center in North Minneapolis, and I've seen some rather horrible things and heard some rather horrible stories from people as a result of them not having that social safety net, or that social safety net dropping. So when it comes to issues of crime, I really do think that Tara actually made a very good point in that there is no one community when it comes to crime. And also, I think we really have to make a big distinction between crimes that are deliberate and crimes that are as a result of something such as addiction. And someone that steals $400,000 and bilks a senior citizen out of their money should not be treated less severely than someone who has drug addiction, in my opinion. But you know, when you look at the overall crime, particularly one of the issues I like to focus on is gun violence. And right now, the statutes in Minnesota, and I think this affects particularly North Minneapolis, if you are driving, if someone is driving a car in North Minneapolis and they're pulled over, or anywhere, and they're pulled over by the police, right now the statute makes it very difficult to link a gun in possession of the person driving the car with the person driving the car if there's more than one person in the car. So what happens is the police confiscate the gun and then don't necessarily actually prosecute the person who's been bringing these guns into our community. So that's one thing I would like to actually address if I were elected. And I think on issues like that, you can bridge, I think it is possible. One of the things I definitely, one of the strengths I believe I have is to actually bridge the gap with people who don't necessarily agree with you. Because you could shout into the wind as long as you want, but if you actually can't bridge the gap and make people see the way you're seeing, then you're not going to get very much accomplished.
Thank you. And candidate Dean, what I'd like to do is sort of refocus. If elected, what would you do to restore some of the funding? Because I know it's difficult not to talk about the violence, but what would you do specifically about restoring funding that matters to this community?
Well, I mean, it would definitely be part of a bill that would author and reinstate many of those different programs. I think it's critical for us to look at crime and safety in the total context. So we're not just looking at the policing side, but we're also looking at the incarceration side. Ultimately, what ends up happening is the GOP on the other side is more than willing to spend money to lock people up, but they're not willing to spend money to make sure that people aren't in the situation where they may be locked up. You know, I heard a very interesting statistic the other day that I've got to do a little bit more research to verify its truth. It said that drug use is the same in the inner city as it is in the suburbs. I think we all know that within adolescence it's exactly the same. Yet, in the inner city, we get policed at 5 to 8 times the same rate for drug crimes as they do out there. That's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is statistics show that in the inner city, violent crime is actually higher. However, it's exactly the same if you make adjustments for unemployment. So you put people in stressful situations, ultimately they are more likely to commit crimes of violence. So what we need to do is we need to understand that complexity, and I think that a great program would be jobs. And I just want to also note that I think it's great that crime is down in the city of Minneapolis over the past several years. But we also had some very record crime years throughout that period that we're actually down from. So let's be honest, if we look at the rate of crime over the past 10 or 15 years, it's been somewhat consistent. So ultimately, I think we need to get honest about what that means, and I think we need to be focusing on where we are today, and we need to begin to improve that. So I think it's going to take some serious legislation to really look at how we're aligning those public safety dollars, which includes corrections, so that we can make it so that kids understand the importance of building healthy relationships in the community.
Thank you very much. Candidate Pomplin, what would you do to restore the funding?
So to restore the funding around public safety, what I would really focus on is increasing or undoing the cuts to local government aid. I think that is the number one thing that really harmed our cities in being able to be safe. And so I would actually look to creating a fair tax structure here in Minnesota. I want to hear and learn from everybody, our small business owners to our property owners to our renters, and learn more about what the burdens of taxes are to communities. But I think the important thing that we need to do to move forward in Minnesota to keep the quality of life that we all want is that we just need a fair tax structure.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, breathing deep. We're getting ready for question number 3. You are in the home stretch, but then here come the people, so I don't know if you want to come in. Politics is ultimately about who gets what and how much. Understanding that currently our state has a projected surplus of $876 million. What's the first thing you'll work on if you're elected into office? And why is this seat particularly important to accomplishing that? And why don't we start out with candidate Alexander?
Well, there is a surplus, but I think the mistake would be to spend that money, quite honestly, on something such as I like to say this, I actually support the idea of a stadium, but I think the idea of spending it on a stadium right now in this economic situation is a bit foolhardy. So when it comes to what would I do with the surplus, or what would I encourage or support with the surplus, that would definitely not be it. What I would like to say, though, is that when you look at overall where we are, the root of everything always comes back to how are we going to get rid of the disparity we have? Because, I know that this might sound cliche, but when people say that, the children are our future, but, there's a big part of that which is definitely true. And the one thing I've noticed right now is when you look at the funding, one of the things that keeps going down and down and down is funding in some ways towards education. And reform and education is probably what I would first look at for ways to spend that money. I wouldn't be looking at recreational ways or ways that you could spend it on giving tax breaks back to people. I would probably look at what are our fundamentals and move forward from there.
Thank you. Let's go ahead with candidate Dean, and then we'll just come down to candidate Pomplin.
Well, that $876 million is a surplus. I would use that to fill the gap that was done with the education shifts. We borrowed from future budgets from the schools to balance the budget at the state level this past time around. We also did that the time around before. And this $876 million would fill about half of that gap. Ultimately, that makes it more expensive for school districts to borrow money to meet payroll, which in turn dwindles the amount of money that they have to operate within the public school system. So I actually think this is a real easy answer for me. It all goes to education, and we get rid of that shift so that our education system can do the things it's supposed to do, and at the same time, we need to be laser focused so that within our community, that we're getting the appropriate dollars so that our kids get the same education that kids get out in the outer suburbs or even in South Minneapolis.
Very succinct, thank you.
Yeah, and I would, to go more succinct, I would say ditto. I think it's about getting our budget back on track. We made some severe cuts that were very unfriendly to our communities, and so I think it's about looking at where we can get our budget back on track, and I think absolutely it's about getting our education back on track and funding the schools.
All right, thank you, Candidate Cole.
I think we're all in agreement here that it's about education, but one thing that we have to recognize is that if we don't pay these dollars back, if we don't do it now, within the next 10 years, we will owe, I can't remember what the exact statistic is, but we will owe just as much, if not more, than we do now, and the kids won't be any different. There's not going to be any growth in the number of kids attending school. The quality is not going to shift. It's not going to change, but we will still owe exponentially more than we owe right now. If we don't make an investment in our youth, as I've been talking to neighbors and delegates, if we don't invest in our youth, and I don't care where you come from, I don't care what language you speak, if you don't have the opportunity to obtain a job like I have, you won't have the opportunity to buy a house. You don't have the opportunity to buy a house, you can't pay taxes. If you don't have the opportunity to get a high-paying job, those of you who are in the baby boomer generation, who've grown accustomed to your lifestyle, that lifestyle will not be there. We have to invest in education. It is a necessity in order for us to maintain our simplistic lifestyle that we have right now, what we enjoy. If we don't do that, then I don't know what kind of state we'll live in. It is imperative that we do.
Looks like our future would have a lot of education in it. That's good. That's good. That's good, candidates. All right, well, you take a breather. Makeda, I saw you around with questions in a bag. Did you go outside? Are we ready for that? I'm sorry. Sorry, madam.
You're just trying to sort through them so that you can watch.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Each of the candidates will have 1 minute to respond to the questions. I'll do my best to read them the way that you intended them. First of all, there's too much money policing and not enough prosperity. A convicted felon is banned from housing, voting, jobs, and public assistance. 75% reoffend. How will you improve the lives of felons, homeless, and people living in poverty? Let's go ahead and begin with candidate Dean.
Well, I think that this is a huge, huge issue that needs to be addressed in our community. For those of you who don't know, I'm a convicted felon. 35 years ago, I made a bad choice, and I was locked up for several months. I was fortunate I got out to go to drug treatment center. I had an addiction, and I was able to turn my life around. I ended up receiving a full pardon, but I also know that that happened to me because I was white. I worked hard, but there are a lot of other individuals that work hard. I've dedicated the past few years of my life, and I will continue to dedicate moving forward, making sure that individuals that have made bad choices have the opportunities to turn their lives around. I'm currently working Take Action Minnesota's Justice for All campaign, and we are beginning to put pressure on private corporations to change their hiring practices so that people that have committed offenses and turned their lives around aren't initially screened out of an opportunity to become contributing members of society. And we need to change that because it's 20% of the total population. And if we don't change that, we're really cutting our whole community short.
Thank you, candidate Dean. Very brave. Thank you. All right, candidate Pomplin. What do you think about what you would do for felons, homeless, and those people living in poverty?
So I'm thinking about any individual really. I think about one of my favorite books, Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and in that story and in Toni Morrison's writing, she really talks about a character and good or bad, about their story, the story behind whatever their scene or actions are within the book. And I think about that when I think about persons who may be, may have committed a felony, may be in a bad situation, may be living in poverty. But there are experiences that have led up to that. And I think that what we need to do is create a more equitable system that understands where people are coming from and that provides second chances, because we all have not lived their story and we don't know where they're coming from, so everybody deserves a second chance.
Thank you very much. Candidate Cole?
We've got three folks, or three groups of people we're talking about in sort of the same situation, which we're talking about as poverty. To go back and to talk about those who've been incarcerated, what we need to do, and I think it's something that we as a community have to support, and with our collective voices made known at the Capitol, that there needs to be a difference in funding of rehabilitation versus incarceration. We put a lot of people in jail, and they come back out the same way they went in. We do that to our juveniles, we do that to our adults. How do you expect someone to be able to come out with the skills, to be able to find housing, to be able to find a job, and to be productive at that job, when we're not teaching them in a space that we are legally responsible for them for? Because it all links to poverty. They came in because of poverty, they come out and go into poverty. What are we doing about their ability to come up out of poverty while they're in our custody? Whether you're talking about children in foster care, whether you're talking about emancipated minors who are under state supervision, whether you're talking about folks who are in the prison system currently.
All right, thank you. And Candidate Alexander?
Well, first I'd like to just thank Ray for his comments. I actually think what you said was very spot on. The only thing I will add to that is I'm a family law attorney and I'm in the North Side, and I have a lot of clients that come in, and the most heartbreaking thing for me to deal with on a day-to-day basis when they come in through my door is to hear that they can't get a job and they have very few choices. So if you went into jail, if you were convicted of a crime, you get out, you have no social safety net, you actually are more than likely to reoffend because, quite honestly, you don't have a lot of other choices. A lot of people come from dysfunctional families and you deal with all these issues. But, I think that the one thing I would definitely want to do if I were elected would be, when you look at the bigger issue, it's also an issue of cost. And I know lots of people talk about how Republicans definitely want to put people or looking to put more people in jail. But at the end of the day, when you go back to some of these smaller areas, it's expensive. And I think what needs to happen is you need to have a conversation where you explain that, a pinch of prevention really is a pound of cure.
Thank you. We'll start with Candidate Poplin. What are the major issues facing residents of downtown Minneapolis, and how will you work to ensure that the residents are fully represented in the legislature?
Well, there's the stadium, right? I'll be honest and say that it's been, that I've not had an opportunity to talk to a lot of people from downtown. I do know that there have been a lot of foreclosure issues with the condos. And so I think and it's something that's universal, I think, across the state and especially in North Minneapolis and in condo living. And so addressing predatory lending practices and addressing the foreclosure issues, I think are definitely issues that I would take on. But then in addition to that, I think it's also about the empty spaces that are throughout downtown. There are a lot of empty businesses in the downtown, entertainment district. And so what can we do to create family-friendly and, nighttime attractions to downtown that brings more money into our community, but then also, again, going back to the challenges of talking to people in downtown, it's also about building a community. It's in this fantastically, pedestrian-friendly area with parks, and yet people don't know each other. So addressing that issue as well as figuring out how do we build community in downtown.
Thank you very much, Candidate Cole.
From some of the conversations I've had with folks in downtown, livability issues are huge. But one thing that I recognize is that a livability issue downtown is a little bit different than a livability issue in North Minneapolis, but it's the same thing. For us as an entire district, we need to stop separating downtown North Minneapolis. Because what's good for North Minneapolis is good for downtown, and what's good for downtown is good for the district. So I'm answering this question because we are one district. When you talk about downtown, the stadium is a huge issue. Some people want it, some people don't. But at the same time, as a resident of this district, I want to feel welcome to come downtown. I don't want to see another wall facing me. I have the Twin Stadium. I need to feel welcome, because if I'm welcome, I will spend my dollars in my district, which is in downtown. What we also need is for people downtown to spend their dollars at the other end of the district, through our economic corridors. And so when we talk about the needs of downtown, they're the same as the needs for North Minneapolis, because we're one.
Candidate Alexander.
I've spoken to a number of people in the downtown area, and of course, there's lots of issues that are very similar. I think the Downtown Council's 2025 plan is a great plan. It actually talks about greening lots of downtown and Nicollet Mall and other parts. I probably disagree with a lot of the people up here in terms of the stadium. I actually support a stadium, but I don't support spending taxpayer money on the stadium. I actually, from my experience living on the north side, a lot of people I talk to who every day that live near me worked at the Twin Stadium. And you know, the thing which dovetails into the last conversation is that a lot of them were people that actually were convicted of a felony in the past, and they could not get employed anywhere else. I also think it's a great economic opportunity for building, and there's a lot of people in the building trades that are out of work at the moment, and I think it's just a great opportunity to move forward. And it's quite honestly, whether people like it or not, football is a civic activity, and so it's a civic function in our society. So,
He has staked his claim on the stadium. Candidate Dean. Candidate Dean.
Well, I think one of the things that's fascinating for me is how diverse we really are as a district. I mean, we're not only culturally diverse, we're probably one of the most economically diverse districts throughout the state of Minnesota. What ails us on the north side impacts people downtown, whether they know it or not. We absolutely need to have thriving businesses that folks downtown want to come to the north side for. But they also want the same type of things that we in the core of North Minneapolis want. They want good public safety. They want actual services that serve their lives and make it easier. And I think that one thing when we talk about the stadium, if the stadium does move forward, we all need to come together to make sure that those jobs there are for minority-owned businesses and for women-owned businesses. Another thing that's probably going to be on the radar in the next year or 2 years that we're all going to have this interesting conversation about is schools. Family population is moving up in downtown. They're going to want a school downtown. Why we've been fighting for the past several years to keep our schools open. So we'll have a rich conversation of what that means moving forward.
Next, thank you. All right, we just gave you one, so how about candidate Alexander? Many issues have a scientific component. What's your perspective and background in science?
well, like every attorney, I have no background in science or math, but I like to say I surround myself with people that actually you can talk to about those issues. I think one of the things that, levity aside, one of the things that I do think that is necessary is that we actually strongly invest in research and development in the state of Minnesota. I mean, the most fascinating thing about moving here, I actually originally from the East Coast, and the most fascinating thing about moving here, other than the fact that people still love to live here despite the weather most of the time, is that there are just amazing opportunities for people to get jobs in all sorts of fascinating math and science and bioscience backgrounds. But again, it's a conversation that we need to the larger conversation we really need to have is going back to actually figuring out, these jobs are great, but if people in our own community can't work there, that's a problem. And again, that all goes back to education, and I'm out of time. So.
Homer, thank you. Candidate Cole.
Well, I have a very wonderful story about my background in science. I went to North High School. I'm a graduate of their SUMATech program, which is their science, math, and technology program. And although I did not become an engineer, I have a master's in urban and regional planning, emphasis in housing and community development. But my other classmates are engineers. I have a classmate who is a professor, PhD professor at the University of Brisbane in astrophysics. His college professor won the Nobel Prize for physics. And the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Prize for physics. I have others who work for Anheuser-Busch. I have others who work for NASA. I got my good science background education in Minneapolis Public Schools in a school that's 6 blocks away. We have the capacity to produce this generation's engineers and technologists and scientists. We need to ensure that we invest in those folks because they're here and they're doing wonderful things.
Thank you. Candidate Conklin?
The question is, what's my experience with science?
Yes, they write, many issues have a scientific component. What's your perspective and background in science?
I love science. I was a child of observation. I didn't talk. Was very shy, which is very opposite of who I am today. And so I was completely about the whys of the world, the whys of the universe. And I think that that's really what kind of drove me into being a community organizer. I wanted to understand why. Why are things the way they are? Why are, why is it, why is it that we don't have a stop sign here when there are children waiting for the bus stop right here? Why do they have speed bumps? Why don't we? And so that's what I worked on when I started going into organizing. And I think from there I went on to saying, well, why does government say that? Why does the city say this? Why does the state say that? And so, I'm, just one of those inquisitive people that love science and love to understand things. And so, natural resources, social sciences, or just curiosity and gossip. That's me.
Thank you very much. And Candidate Dean?
Well, I love science. I'm an architect by education and training. I practice within the field and work with lots of engineers. I think that when we think about science, we have to think there's really multiple scales. There's small scale, which is very specific, and there's large scale that looks at systems. I think ultimately my ability to jump back and forth between those different scales are what separates me from a lot of other folks. I focus a lot on sustainability, but that really doesn't mean anything. I mean, it means a lot, but the way in which systems interact with each other is really, really critical. And if you focus only on one system, you might have unintended consequences elsewhere. So my ability to sort of look multidimensional at things as we evaluate and make some choices, I think is really, really critical. And I think the thing that we can all glean from science uses metrics. They look for results. They need to verify. And that's something that we can all gain in our community about many of the issues that we're trying to transform.
Fantastic, thank you. Candidate Cole, what would you do to improve the West Broadway corridor as a commercial corridor for North Minneapolis?
I think a way to improve West Broadway is to stop making it the sole focus of our economic vitality. We have so many other corridors that we neglect, and we only focus on Broadway. How do we drive people to Broadway are our connecting corridors, which we have neglected. So in order for Broadway to be viable, we've got all these wonderful plans. The topography is crazy. We all know about that little bend when you come around the curve and you can't see around it. We've all driven there very slowly around that. Broadway, although it is our east-west connection, it is not our only connection. We need to work with our businesses. We need to encourage small businesses, but we also need to encourage safety. It is a county highway. I live a few blocks from Broadway. I don't feel safe crossing the street. So when we start talking about economic vitality, we have to look at the street because we can't change it. It's county highway. What can we do to get residents to walk to those businesses, but also get Broadway to be that connecting corridor to our other areas of economic development?
Thank you. Candidate Alexander, what would you do?
Well, I maybe disagree a little bit with Tara. When I first started my law practice, I actually tried opening up an office on West Broadway. And the only person that would rent me a space was Keith Reitman. I don't know if any of you know Keith.
Oh, yeah.
But don't have the resources to actually bring people in who actually want to start business there. So I think it is the heart of, in my opinion, it's the heart of North Minneapolis. And, I think that whomever is elected, and there's a lot of great people up here that would be great at doing this job, they really have to build connections with people in the business community while they're there. Because at the end of the day, Coloplast came and located here because they wanted to be on the river. It overlooks downtown. That's beautiful. But we have lots of space, and we have to get past the stigma of the crime. We have to get past the stigma of just West Broadway by itself. And I think you do that by promoting it. So I think anyone here, their big objective, if they're elected, should be promoting West Broadway as a place to do business.
Thank you. Candidate Dean.
I actually think we need to have a large investment in West Broadway. Without a main commercial corridor in our community, these other arterials that are off of the main corridor won't be able to thrive. There's a reason why we don't have services at Penn and Plymouth. And it's not because Penn and Plymouth isn't a great corner. It's because we don't even have a viable commercial corridor on Broadway. So we need to begin to invest there, and ultimately that will create the satellite areas that I believe will be neighborhood service-oriented places. You're right, the state doesn't address the county road. But if we as state legislators can't lobby and can't push our county and our county commissioners to really change that road, then I don't know what we're in office to do. Because if we can't work across jurisdictions, whether it's the city, whether it's the county, or even through the federal government with Congressman Ellison, we're not utilizing our position to its fullest capacity. So I commit to do that and work with those as individuals, build those relationships, and have the transformation we need in our community.
Thank you. Candidate Fong.
So, if I had an opportunity to talk to the business owners, I would ask them, what would they do with $20,000? Because that's the situation that many businesses along the central corridor right now are faced. They're got construction happening in front of their business that's going to turn their business, depress or decrease their businesses over the next several months, and they have $20,000 that they can use to help either offset losses, or they can use it as an opportunity to expand their business and do something differently. And so I would ask the business owners along Broadway, what would you do if you had a chance to enhance your business here? And when I did the same survey project that I did with Hawthorne Area Community Council, and interviewing and talking to residents, a lot of them were very interested in owning their own business, but they never had any education with it. They didn't have the support they needed to start their own business or to have a successful business. And so I think it's about offering that support, the education, and then also offering assets. We in our communities are challenged to access assets to build our businesses. And so it's also about creating ways and avenues for them to get those assets to build and grow their business.
Thank you very much. We'll entertain one last question because we've got just a little bit of extra time, which is interesting for a debate. Nicely done, folks. Do you support Crown Hydro on the Mississippi River in downtown East? And how about we'll do the potpourri, just throw it up and somebody take it.
Can you repeat the question?
Do you support Crown Hydro on the Mississippi River in downtown East? Candidate Alexander?
I do. I know that Bobby Joe disagrees on that particular issue. I'd love to chat with him more about it. I think it's a great opportunity I think it's a great, for many people that don't know about it, it's, actually I couldn't even explain the entire process, but it's basically a hydro that's underneath the water that's not really going to be affecting the area. I know there's some people here that is their biggest issue and they don't care what anyone says about it. I just tend to disagree. I think it's environmentally friendly, it helps certain businesses in the area, and I think it's a good idea.
Thank you so much, Candidate Alexander. Candidate Cole, are you ready, or Candidate Dean?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think clean energy is an important part of the future in our community as well as our state and our country. I'm not sure that Crown Roller Mill will be that clean energy thing that we want it to be. There's been a lot of studies done on the impact and what it could be, and I'm not a big fan of studying things to death. But if we're going to do something as significant as that, we need to be sure, because oftentimes there are unintended consequences of things that appear to be, sure, it makes sense, let's do that. So I think it's better to be safe than it is to be sorry. So I would propose that we continue to look at that project and Sometimes it's okay to stop things, because in the future, we might have something different, a different technology. Most of you have a phone in your pocket. 15 years ago, would you think you would have had a phone in your pocket? So I think sometimes having large debates about controversial issues could be a good thing.
Thank you very much. If we can, for time, candidate Conklin and then candidate Cole.
I actually don't know much about it. I would want to learn more about it, hear what residents are concerned about with it, understand the science and why of it, and make a decision from there.
Thank you very much. And candidate Cole.
Thank you. I'll also say that I haven't heard much about this, but I think when it comes to development anywhere in this district, and Minnesotans being who we are, there's a fear of change. What we need to know about this is, what are the impacts to community? What do we think the impact is going to be? And what is the actual impact that is anticipated? There's a community education that needs to happen. I know with government as well as with the private sector, what happens oftentimes is we have a public meeting that's much like this. We have some boards, we have some pretty pictures, and we tell you what we want you to hear. And we went ahead and do about business as usual. What needs to happen with development in our district is, as a community, coming together and saying, okay, you want to build something, you need to come to us. And as a legislative person, that is my job, to bring the elected officials together, as well as with residents, and say, you present to us what you want to do. Then we will tell you what we need you to do. And then we'll have a negotiation and figure out how we can get both of those things done. This is about empowerment as citizens and taking back our actual birthright for politics.
Thank you. You have done a beautiful job and been a beautiful panel to moderate. You have 1 minute now to let the people hear what you would have them to hear. So what would you like to say for your closing remarks? And why don't we just start with candidate Dean, since you're the guy closest to me, you're the lucky guy tonight.
Okay. Well, I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight. Elections are an important time for our community to have a conversation about what we value and what's important. I think there's sort of two things that we all need to think about. We need to begin to invest. And when I mean invest, in many different ways. We can't look at short-term solutions anymore. We can't speculate on bubbles that often burst. That there may be opportunities, but we need to be sure that we're investing in the correct thing as we move forward. You've seen me out in the community over the past decade. I'm passionate about this place I live. You see me at the Northside Transportation Network, something that's really controversial. But we're going to have lots of controversial issues, and we need to have people that are willing to get up in front of a room and have that conversation with the community. We all may not disagree, but if we don't have the conversation, we're all going to lose. So I would hope that you will support me, and I'll look forward to talking to those of you that I haven't had a chance to speak with yet. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Dean. Candidate Alexander.
Well, I also want to thank everyone for coming. I mean, it is a weeknight and you're all here, which shows the civic participation here is great. I love it here. I live a little further north, but when the tornado took my house away, I chose to stay here. I bought the house right next to North High School. This is a great community. I mean, just the people running. We have, Lily's not here, but we have people of all different races running. It shows the strength of this area. We really build off our strengths here. I think the quality I have is being able to bridge different connections and bring people together for common goals. And I really think it would be a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to represent this area I call home. And quite honestly, I look forward to the next few weeks as we have these conversations with each of you.
Thank you very much. Candidate Cole.
So we talk about being proud residents. I actually helped recruit Ian to North Minneapolis. I said, you need to buy a house in North Minneapolis, and this is why I chose to stay.
One of the many.
One of the many. One of the many who did a lot of shopping with you. What I would like to say, though, about being a state legislator, how many people participated in the census that just passed in 2010? I was actually one of the co-leads for Hennepin County that went out and worked internally with staff and externally with the community. When we went out into the community, we talked about, there's X amount of dollars that everybody's worth, and if you know 10 people that didn't fill out the census, it was $1 million that was lost. Now that we've all been counted in this district, we've now gone through redistricting and reapportionment so that way we can have equal representation. The point of electing a state legislator as well as anybody else and any elected official is to go get your money. You count, you pay taxes, you pay state taxes, and you pay federal taxes. My job is to get your money and to spend it on what you want it spent on. And again, this is not about what I can do, this is about what we can do together.
Thank you. Candidate Conklin.
So I just want to share one of the things that really drive me. So I was a women's studies major in my undergraduate, and as dated as 70s feminism is, one of the things that really sticks with me is the personal is political. And that is exactly why I do this work. The personal is political. I keep talking about stories, I keep talking about voices, because it's what's happening in our lives, in our homes, that we need to be talking about. We need to be coming together as a community, and we need to start taking some action around it. What's happening in your household is probably happening in my household. And so what we need to do is get those stories together and build power. And so the personal is absolutely political, and I also want to just remind people, I'm an old ACORN organizer, and so I just can't not say this, but the people united will never be defeated. And that is one of the things that I feel strongly about me and my candidacy, is that I am about bringing communities together, working across communities, and going for it, and what we need and want for our communities. So thank you.
Thank you very much. About North Minneapolis and coming up and showing up. And Makeda is going to give us a special surprise.
Just a few more things. You do know that February 7th is what?
Precinct caucuses.
And what time will you be at your caucuses?
6:30.
Okay, so that's number one. Number two, on January 26th, that's this Thursday, at Creekview, we will have 58A forum.
Right.
All right? I know that most of you here are 58B, but I know some of you are a little bit beyond that. And then on January 31st at Falwell Park, at the same time, we will have our Senate forum. So we expect to see you at those things. We look forward to seeing you at your caucuses, and thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Just keep moving. Keep it moving. Keep it moving. Move around. Good job. I was watching in my office. Yeah. That's so exciting.
And now I'll put this one on YouTube, and then I can put that on the website so people can watch it. So yeah, it's great.
You are so awesome.